Thank you very much. So apologies for my late entrance. I'll take you from adverse possession of art to adverse possession of land. So let's start with this. Imagine an intense international armed conflict which is taking its toll on the civilian population of one or all states involved, causing many to flee their homes en masse and relocate elsewhere. This might be temporary or it might be permanent, and we know that some are prevented from getting to their property because it's situated beyond enemy lines. Now, once the conflict is beginning to end and coming to its resolution, parties are beginning to think about what to do with this property that was left behind the enemy lines. And we know that before that moment, before this property is settled, there might be people using it. So if one person has left a home in a village in one state and has relocated to state B, another person might come and occupy that place for a variety of reasons. It might be that territorial state has sent them there because there's a shortage of housing or because they wanted to make sure that no one will come back. But this is a situation that we know is rather common. Now, these new residents in these houses or neighborhoods might have already been there for a while. They might have established new communities or new lives there. They themselves might have some expectation to defend their occupation of their new homes, even though originally they were not the owners and they don't have the original title to the property. And the same might be, of course, across enemy lines. Now, in this paper, which I co-authored with Eyal Ben-Listi, we don't want to revisit the substantive question of whose right trumps, the original owner or the new inhabitant of the house or of the land. But rather, what we wish to highlight is a preliminary matter. Who gets to decide how we resolve these conflicts? Now, as we've heard and is known, the individual right to property is not unlimited. We know that governments have wide discretion in determining what public interests justify the privation of private property and in balancing the interest of the person whose property might be limited or taken with that of the community as a whole. Now, this discretion is grounded in the presumption that this authority making the determination is operating in accordance with law and is operating for the benefit of the community at large. So the property owners whose rights were limited or whose property was taken for this public use and benefit are therefore assumed to enjoy at least some dividend from this mechanism of the taking of property, if not from this particular taking, then from other takings, in the past, in the present, or in the future. One other requirement is that this is done in accordance with the legal procedure that is grounded in the individual owner's franchise and her opportunity to influence, to some extent, decision-making within her state about how to build the mechanism of property taking. In other words, our claim is that the discretion to take or limit property rights is subject to the requirement that any limitation to the right to property rests procedurally on two separate preliminary, necessary but not sufficient conditions, and that is inclusion and representation. And I'll explain both. By inclusion, what we mean is that the entity that interferes with property rights for the public good is indeed capable of internalizing the welfare of the relevant political community as a whole, including the welfare of the individual owner whose rights are limited or taken. Now, that person, again, as I said, might be thought to benefit from the overall regime of property taking. By representation, the second condition, what we allude to is that the tools necessary to ensure inclusion in that public good means that the authority making the determination has to be sufficiently well informed by and accountable to the people affected by its decision. So the demands for inclusion and representation require that the authority or authorities determining the entitlements to property ought to have substantial links with the individual or individuals, with the communities where properties are taken or limited, as well as with the public good that is promoted by taking. Now, when we, now I'll take you back to this example I started with. When we have a conflict, and there are basically two communities, two countries, and two authorities, our claim is that still the persons whose rights are taken, whose lands is taken, has to be least represented by one of these authorities and has to at least benefit from the public good of one of these communities. They have to be represented and included by at least one of these governments. And when that happens, then we claim the states, the authorities making the determination, do indeed have the authority to sort of redistribute land and property among them for the benefit of their communities. Now, when these countries think about how to do this redistribution, how to amend the public good of both of their communities, they are allowed to take into consideration the question of peace. Peace does contribute to the public good of both communities, and they might choose, in the interest of peace, to sacrifice some property claims and land of their own citizens. And we think that that's a justifiable consideration to take into account. Things get murkier, however, when there are people who are not part of any of these communities, who are not cannot be assumed to benefit from the public good that is derived from this expropriation, who are not represented by any of the communities. And in these instances, we think that the justification to limit or to extinguish their private property rights is much weaker. And these concerns are further amplified if we think of unilateral mechanisms that states might want to establish to settle the private property claims of individuals whom they don't represent and who are not part of the community whose public good is benefited by this expropriation. One more thing is that it's important when we do this, that when we think about post-conflict negotiations, we're doing this from an ex post perspective. So a lot of harm has already been done, and we want to act with a view to the future. We want to act in the interest of peace and in the interest of getting a new slate ready for everyone. This is not meant as a sort of a recipe on how to limit or hurt private property rights during a conflict. Right? This is about settling once conflict has ended, all open states. But when a conflict is not yet ended, we think that it is even more problematic to settle a unilateral private property claims mechanism. Okay. So in this context, our argument is that individuals and communities, both individuals and the communities to which they belong, have to reasonably be thought to benefit from the public good. And this might be achieved not only by returning to the property. At some points, we might want to allow people to return to the property, even if they're not there at the moment. So the European Court of Human Rights, in the case of Cyprus, has ruled that at least there should be the option for some property owners to go back to their homes and return to them physically and not just get compensation. But we think that compensation is indeed also another tool in our toolkit that we would like to consider. And indeed our article investigates two conflicts. One is Cyprus and the other is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I will focus on this second example, but I'm happy to talk about it. So Israel's repeated attempts to regulate the private property claims of Palestinians, both in the post-1948 context under domestic law and in the post-1967 context, also under the framework of occupation law, has been done with at least nominal recognition of its uncertain position to do so finitely. So the mechanisms of seizing property ownership or property use and possession rights and assigning them to a custodian rather than to simply expropriating them, we think indicate a formal deference of the final resolution of these rights to a point where there could be a political settlement. And we view this formal position that used to be exhibited by legislation and actions of the Israeli government as justified by the normal principles that govern the state regulation of property rights following a conflict. So if we have sort of mass situations of first possession, then we want to resolve them with a view to ensuring the best way that we can augment public good for all communities involved. And so we think this is really has been a recognition of Israel's sort of limits on its ability to extinguish private property claims in areas that are not under its sovereignty, so particularly in the West Bank, and the need to defer the settlement to international political settlement. However, in the past several years, the Israeli government has engaged in various attempts to forge mechanisms which regulate the rights of Palestinians or Palestinian owners to their property in the West Bank, on which Jewish settlement had already been built. Okay? So this is something that is rather problematic under international law. Hague Regulation number 46 of the law of occupation forbids the confiscation of private property by an occupying power. However, the Israeli government has claimed, and the Supreme Court has recognized, that the military commander in the occupied territories has the authority to take Palestinian private property in occupied territories for public purposes in certain circumstances. And it's also been said that although Jewish settlers were not part of the formally protected persons in the area, they were the civilian population in the area, and their interests could be taken into account. So what could be read from this decision by the court is that Israel may choose to further, or may, when it is thinking about the public good it is augmenting as a result of dispossession, it may take into account the public good of the Jewish settlers. We think that that is rather problematic. The most key, I would say, enactment in this regard is the law for the regularization of settlement in Judea and Samaria from 2017, which has been suspended by the Supreme Court pending a petition. And this law basically aims to resolve property rights of Palestinians with respect to lands on which settlements have been used, but whose use and possession rights were not actually held by the IDF when they were built. So there is a situation, there is a procedure where formally Israel can take the land and then hand it over to settlements, but these are particular settlements where even that was not done, so they were just built on private land. The law formally applies to settlements that had been built, quote, in good faith, or, quote, with the consent of the state, which is very broadly defined. And it determines that such property has no owner, and where such property has no owners, it shall be deemed government property, assigned to the IDF custodian, which will then reassign it to the settler. And there's still this provision that the taking of use and possession rights shall remain in force pending political resolution of the status in the area. But that already seems, given what the law enables, to be rather tentative and disingenuous, I would say. Okay, so let me just end with one last minute. We think that this mechanism by Israel and the efforts by Israel really don't meet any of the conditions that we think are required in order to justifiably take property close to home. Because the individual owners whose lands are taken for settlements are not included in any authority, and not involved in any, they don't have any possibility of affecting the procedure whereby their lands are taken. And they are certainly not included in the public good that is augmented. And so they suffer but don't benefit anything. And I would say, moreover, that if the situation in Cyprus could be justified, as the court, the European Court has said, because of its ex post nature, the conflict there is basically it's done. Here we have an ex ante decision, which will enable further disposition of Palestinian homes. And we think that's another very grave point to this.
Thank you.